These are two of the very best webcams you can buy. Both are capable of 4K at 30 frames per second and 60 frames at 1080. They come with some seriously impressive specs, and they both come with additional features that you don't get on regular webcams. In a dark room with just the glow from our monitors, and both of them perform well. Obviously not as good as if you've got proper lighting on yourself, so do expect some grain to the image, but they are certainly good enough for a quick call, and the movement looks as though we are getting the full 30 frames per second in the 4K resolution, with natural light coming in through the window and us sitting next to it, and we're overexposed on the one side of our face on both, which is what I was expecting. A lot of the grain in the background has cleared up, and we're getting a really crisp image on both. I would say that the Insta360 is slightly crisper, but the Tiny 2 still performs extremely well. Using our standard main light in our room, and again they're both looking good. Again, I would say that the Insta360 gives us a little more clarity to the image, with the Tiny 2 looking very slightly blurry, but it still performs extremely well. Also a sneak peek at the autofocus on these, which is some of the quickest focusing I've seen on any webcam, using ring lights in front of us, and this is where we're getting a further improvement to the overall quality, with both of them looking amazing. I would say that the Insta360 is still slightly crisper, but it's a very tight call. The Tiny 2 does deliver a slightly darker image in general, and the blacks look much deeper too, which you can see on my hoodie. It also brings a little more vibrance to the red text on there too. Switching on some coloured backlights behind us, and the first thing we notice is that the Insta360 Link goes really overexposed, with our face looking extremely washed out. This can be resolved by popping your hand up to the lens and moving it away, and this gets the auto exposure to kick back in. This is not something we've experienced with the Tiny 2 during testing so far. Focusing on a small object performs extremely well on both, with them picking up the focus rapidly. There will be occasions where it doesn't pick it up immediately, which leaves you with a blurred object, but if you move this out of frame or further away and bring it back towards the lens, then it will kick back in. This happened more on the Tiny 2, but they do both perform exceptionally well. If you're wanting to focus on text, then once again both of these are going to perform extremely well, and even when you bring the text right up to the lens, it will pick up the focus quickly and accurately, removing the green screen behind us, and both of these perform great. There is some pixelation to the bottom corner, but that's more to do with my lighting setup, which clears up once I set up an additional light, so as long as your lighting is set up correctly, they will both be great. This is a microphone test using the OBSBOT Tiny 2 webcam. This is the kind of audio you can expect from the inbuilt microphone. This is a microphone test using the Insta360 Link webcam. This is the kind of audio you can expect from the inbuilt microphone. Holding your hand up in a high five position will enable tracking on both. I had a play around with this for a while, and the Tiny 2 is just much better. The Insta360 software will let you toggle between 3 different tracking speeds, whereas the Tiny 2 can toggle between standard and motion. The motion seems to track quicker, but at the expense of the smoothness of the motion, but it does perform amazingly well. There's additional options too, like just tracking your upper body, close up. You can even do a headless track, or just track the lower part of your body. Again, this performed extremely well. The Insta360 does come with 3 options of its own, which are the head, the half body, or getting the whole body into the shot. Tracking of your hands is possible too, but only on the Tiny 2, and this wasn't too bad, and it does seem to track. Bringing up your other hand tends to get a little confused to which one it should be looking at, but on the whole it wasn't terrible, and it would be pretty good to showcase something in your hand. You can fine tune the tracking positions for this, but it's going to be trial and error to tweak it to your own environment. But no matter which speed you set the Insta at, whilst it did perform quite well, it is quite easy to lose you, and it just stays in that position that you were lost at, and it will very rarely pick you back up and continue tracking. The Tiny 2 on the other hand performed brilliantly, and it just didn't lose us. We pushed this even further by leaving the room to see if it could detect us on our way back in, and it passed this with flying colours, and it continued to track from where it left off. Doing the L shape with your hand and moving upwards will zoom the Insta360 in, and stopping the gesture will stop the zoom, and just the L shape without moving up and down makes the OBSBOT zoom in, and this either zooms all the way in or all the way out with no in between. But the Tiny 2 does come with a dynamic zoom option, where you can do the L shape with both hands and pull inwards and outwards to control the zoom, and you can stop it wherever you want. When using the OBSBOT software, we noticed that when using the 4K resolution, the previews seem quite choppy, and it doesn't look as though we're getting the 30 frames per second. This is not something that we encountered with the Insta360 software, with it looking much more fluent. I checked Task Manager and could see that the OBSBOT software was using over 3 times as much CPU power and over twice the RAM. Switching this to 1080p made things look so much better, and it looks as though we are hitting those higher frame rates. We did see a reduction in the resources needed, but still much more than the Insta360 requires. A few features you get on the Insta360 and not on the Tiny 2 is the ability for the head to turn into portrait mode, which is great for shooting vertical videos for stuff like YouTube Shorts or TikTok videos. If you want to do this with the Tiny 2, then you will need to physically tilt the webcam on its side. There's also gimbal adjustment, where if you've not mounted your webcam straight, then you can manually adjust this in the software to straighten things up. Now the Tiny 2 does come with some features that you don't get on the Insta360. There's a retouch option where we can change the way we look, which does a good job and quite fun to mess around with. There's also a filters option to change the way the scene looks, but both of these use quite a lot of system resources, so you may encounter the movement becoming choppy when using these. There's also this unusual body shape adjustment option, which I've never seen before, where you can manipulate the way that you look. Personally, this is great for me because I can make myself look slimmer and taller, but again, this is intensive on your system resources, so expect it to not look too fluent when this is being used. We can enable a background blur if you want to hide your background, and again, this is a nice feature to have, but it does cause juddering to the image. The more you increase the blur, the more unrealistic it actually looks. We did install the NVIDIA video effects and tried using the advanced feature, but this didn't seem to work as it no longer blurred the background unless we went back to the native option. The Tiny 2 can be controlled by your voice, whereas the Insta360 can't. There's 9 different phrases you can say for the camera to react. Track me. Unlock me. Deskview mode is available on both, which tilts the head downwards. The image does look slightly elongated in this mode on both, and if you want to bring something closer to the lens, then the Insta360 will refocus, and it does do a decent job. The Tiny 2 also focuses fine. It does take a little longer for it to do so, but it does deliver a good final result. And if you're not bringing objects closer to the lens and you're displaying things on your desk, then they are both fine, with the Tiny 2 delivering a better image with less grain. Both of them come with a preset position option where you can focus on various things around the room and save the position, and at the click of the button you can switch to each of these. The Tiny 2 allows you to set 3 positions, and it is a little jerky when coming from one to another, whereas the Insta360 allows you to select up to 6 positions, and it's very quick with the transition between them. But you do get a voice option on the Tiny 2 to save you having to go into the software to switch. Position 2. Position 1. Focusing on a whiteboard can be performed on both. The Insta360 comes with 4 tracking stickers to stick to the corners of the board, and performing the V sign with your hand tells the Insta to search for the whiteboard, but these stickers must be in sight for it to work. The Tiny 2 doesn't come with stickers, and you will need to click on the option in the software for it to search for the whiteboard, but it does produce a clearer image than the Insta in this test. It's also worth mentioning that if the Tiny 2 can't find the whiteboard, then it finds the next best thing, which it thinks may possibly be that whiteboard. HDR can be enabled, with it working in 4K on the Tiny 2, whereas the Insta360 only works at 1080p and 30 frames per second. Both software allow you to manually configure options like shutter speed and ISO, but the Insta does have an exposure curve option to really fine tune how your image looks. OBSBOT have their own plugin for the Streamdeck, where you can control the options at the push of a button. Sleep Tiny.